Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Lore Master Podcast. I'm Aiden and today I'm actually going to be talking about something a little different. This is going to be the first episode in a series based on another beloved franchise of mine, besides The Song of Ice and Fire, that being Star Wars. But don't worry, there will still be many more Game of Thrones and Song of Ice and Fire related podcasts and videos to come in the future. But I just wanted to start this today because I've been a huge Star Wars fan ever since I was about 5 or 6 years old. So I'm really excited to begin this new series, and I just know that I'll have an absolute ton to talk about. Thinking of an idea for the first episode really was a no-brainer. To me, the Sith and the dark side of the Force really are hands down the most fascinating aspect of the entirety of Star Wars lore. I could talk and speculate and read and watch Sith-related material for days and days, so it just feels natural to kickstart this new series off with this topic. Now, as many of you may know, there is a ridiculous amount of information out there on the Sith and the dark side, so don't worry, I'm not going to be ignoring Legends in favor of the new Disney canon, but I am going to be organizing this topic into several different sections and parts and videos just to break it up, because there's such a wealth of information that to put it all together would take forever to make and would be about 3 hours long. So I'm going to start this podcast off by explaining the origins of the Dark Jedi and the Sith, and exactly what the dark side had to do with their creation. Around 25,793 years before the Battle of Yavin, on the planet Tython, the Force was discovered, and a conflict called the Force Wars of Tython were carried out between two different philosophical groups: those who advocated the use of Ashla, or the light side, or the practitioners of Bogan, the dark side, the latter being defeated, which resulted in the Jedi Order being formed. Some 5 centuries later, however, the Legions of Leto was formed by the fallen Jedi Zendor. The conflict they began with the Jedi Order would become known as the First Great Schism, and it ended with Zendor's forces being completely decimated. Things slowed down for quite a while in terms of the Dark Jedi, and it isn't really until 7,000 years before the Battle of Yavin that things start to kick off again in an event called the 100-Year Darkness. This event is significant to me for 2 reasons. First off, because it was the creation of the Sith, and secondly, because of its main player, Ajanta Paul. So you may know Ajanta Paul if you played the Knights of the Old Republic video games, and as a side note, if you are a gamer and presumably a Star Wars fan, there is absolutely no reason not to play these games. Everything about them is just fantastic. I mean, the story is at least on par with the original trilogy films. There's hours of gameplay there, amazing writing, a mind-blowing plot twist, and plus it's only about $8 or so on Steam. And because it's about 13 years old, you can play it on virtually any computer. But back on topic, we have seen Ajanta Paul before very briefly in the Coder games as a Force ghost who dwells in his tomb in the Valley of the Dark Lords on Korriban. From talking to him, he reveals a little bit about who he was and why he was on Korriban, and seems generally remorseful for his actions, constantly hoping for his old Jedi Master's forgiveness. Even though he isn't featured very prominently at all in the games, I actually found him to be a pretty fascinating character with one of the coolest lores behind him, and he seriously has become one of my favorite characters in the entire Star Wars universe. Before the 100-Year Darkness began, Ajanta Paul was a Jedi Master and a skilled alchemist who eventually discovered some techniques that many of his fellow Jedi did not approve of, creating and forming a life. Things like reduce species, and speculation even says that he could use his power to revive dead worlds. These studies are seen as atrocious by the Jedi, and the Jedi attempted to stop him from continuing his practice of it, and ultimately labeled him a pawn of the dark side, and then exiled Paul and his followers. In retaliation, Ajanta Paul and some of his followers, Zozan, Karnus Moor, Remulus Drapa, and Sorzus Sin, declared war against the Jedi, creating the Second Great Schism and the start of the 100-Year Darkness. Due to the fact that they had little success in recruiting a lot of the other Jedi in the Order, the exiles started using their alchemical powers to create an army of Sith zombies to fight with them, though in the end it proved ineffective, and the Jedi Order managed to push Ajanta Paul and his followers back, and not even Sith Leviathans could help them win. The Dark Jedi were finally defeated on the world of Korbos, due as much to attacks from the Jedi and Republic as to infighting amongst themselves, a trait we still see from the Sith to this day. Even though Paul and his followers were defeated, they were not killed. The Jedi instead chose to exile them, stripping away their ranks. The exiles traveled around the galaxy afterwards from one planet to another, eventually landing on the world Korriban, called Moraband now in the new canon, in the Horus-Set system located in the Outer Rim. It is here where the dark side was truly embraced. The exiles arrived on Korriban around 6,900 years before the Battle of Yavin, and realized that it was actually inhabited by an intelligent civilization, and one especially gifted in the dark side of the Force. The beings were known as Sith, though sometimes called Red Sith or Sith Purebloods. For the purpose of this video, to distinguish them from the Dark Jedi led by Ajanta Paul, I'll just call them the Red Sith. Much like the Dark Lords of the Sith, the way of life for the Red Sith was a constant struggle, and fighting was seen as a basic aspect of existence. They valued conflict just as much as peace, and viewed it as a way to continuously improve. They were almost always in a constant state of war, but despite this, their civilization was actually pretty sophisticated, and there were several different important aspects of it which governed their lives. According to the Dark Lord Nagasato, who lived generations after the arrival of Ajanta Paul, in times long past, the Sith race proved malleable, splitting into a meek and servile slave class, an intelligent and nimble engineer class, others interbred with the early exiled Jedi, like the ancestors of Ludo Kresh, watering down the powerful bloodlines. But most useful of all were the members of the vicious Massassi warrior class. Red Sith society was structured into a very rigid class system, meaning that there was no alternating between one or the other. If you were a priest, you were always going to be a priest, never a warrior or an engineer, and vice versa. The Zugruk caste were the engineers who constructed and maintained technology like starships and droids, as well as buildings and structures, such as tombs. The Massassi were the warriors, who tended to be taller and stronger than the other castes, being excellent fighters and aggressive warriors. The Kisai were the priests, whose role it was to study the nature of the dark side of the Force and practice magic and alchemy. At the time Ajanta Paul and his followers arrived on Korriban, the Red Sith were led by a king called Hakagam Grouch, who was initially skeptical of the Dark Jedi. However, Paul managed to persuade the king's shadow hand, a sort of second-in-command or apprentice, to betray Hakagam, and then Ajanta Paul personally executed the king. Seeing this, the Red Sith were in awe of the Dark Jedi, but not just by their powers, but by their technology as well, and began to worship Paul and his followers as gods, naming them Gen Ari, meaning Dark Lord, and thus Ajanta Paul became known as the first Dark Lord of the Sith. From there, the first Sith Empire was forged. The Empire very quickly expanded into other worlds, perhaps the most important of which being the planet Ziost, which was made the capital of the Sith Empire. After several decades of reigning as the Dark Lord of the Sith, Ajanta Paul finally died, and his body was placed in a tomb in the Valley of the Dark Lords, where Sith for hundreds of generations would be laid to rest. That wraps up this first episode in my series where I researched the history of the Sith and the dark side of the Force. I had a lot of fun looking up information and compiling it into a video for you all, and in the process I sort of discovered a few other topics that I'd really like to speak about sometime in the future, such as a more comprehensive guide to the Sith species itself, and also in continuing the series and going through the history of the Sith from the very beginning all the way up to the Clone Wars, as well as a video dedicated solely to explaining the dark side of the Force as well as the light. And of course, I plan on making videos about 100 other Star Wars topics in the future, so watch out for those. And as well, more Game of Thrones, more Song of Ice and Fire related videos, as well as a few different topics. I have a lot of things I love to talk about, so I really want to incorporate them all into this channel, so watch out for those as well. So I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I will see you next time.